and we are back with another 996. So this is actually one that we've worked on before. I'm going to be welding the coolant tubes for this thing, which is actually a normal thing for turbos because of how they were put together from factory, which is essentially like they were glued together. And a typical thing is after you start tracking one will blow out, or several will blow out because the plastic or the glue that they did for it isn't strong enough for the pressure created when you're floored a lot. Now we have a video on like a cheap fix, but we only did one of the tubes because, you know, he just wanted to get back at it. It's been a year since that, and now we haven't had any problems, but I'm just gonna go through and weld everything together, and then we ain't gonna have any problem. Another thing that people do is they pin it, which I'm not sure what they do. I'm guessing like drill a bolt in there and some RTV or something, I don't know. But we're going to weld it, and there's a chance that we might have to drop the engine. I'm gonna do my best to not drop the engine. If you're going to try to do this at home, just pay attention. Hopefully I'll know what I'm doing by the end of this. There we go. Just so you know where we're going. So the first one that we fixed was back in there. I think it was either this hose or that hose. So we're going to be going under the intake manifold, which you should be able to take off without dropping the engine. You just kind of sag the engine down a bit. So I'm getting the intercooler or the turbo piping, the cold pipes that come from the intercoolers into the engine out, air boxes out, which generally it's pretty easy with these. The piping on these have this little piece and it just moves down, pipe slides out, and then it goes back where it should be. That way when you slide the pipe back in, it just locks in. It's really nice how it works. And unlike other German cars, this one actually works the way it is intended. All right, I'm just getting some of this out of the way now. But I will tell you, if you're ever going to be in here trying to do this, or even taking the intake manifold off, there's this little tube on, this is, you know, where the turbo inlets meet the throttle body. And this little tube goes on the back of this guy, right? So the easiest thing you can do is just push this piece up and slide it off of the little bracket right there that this thing sits on. And then this is freer to move and you can kind of pull it out. Other than that, this is the only thing you can get to, and it's got, well, let's just say almost a permanent clamp. So it's not a clamp that you want to try to take off and try to put back on. So the other side just slides on, so it doesn't matter there. There isn't even a clamp on it. But that is one thing that will drive someone nuts if they're coming in here for it. Other than that, I still have a decent amount to get off before we can see what we're working with. So I'm gonna keep chugging away at this. So another thing that I'm gonna say for these, right? We got the compressor off to the side. I didn't discharge anything. Now there's the wire that I, couldn't get out. And it took me a little bit, but it just literally pulls out of where it goes in. This is something you'd expect to see on like a 70s Chevy. I wasn't really expecting to see it on here, but kudos to Porsche for, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So this is the hose that we did last time actually. And there's this metal tube behind it, or that it goes into. And so essentially everything coolant wise that goes to that sort of stuff is what I have to essentially grind down and then weld together. So this one has the JB Weld in it, but since we're in here, we're not going to leave it JB welded. We're not going to, give it a weak point. And so we're going to do all of them like that. And as you can see, it is very much so deep within the beast. So next thing is I'm going to work on getting this stuff out. Of course, this is the oil filter and so on, and then the intake tubes and stuff like that. And we'll probably be able to see this, but I don't even have the engine sagged right now. So I'm feeling very confident that we shouldn't have to drop the engine. But Murphy's Law, we never know what's going to happen, so. Okay, I'm gonna lower the engine. Essentially, I don't want the engine to drop, but it's just 2 motor mounts, and undo it, and then everything will sag. And the nice thing is they did give us enough sag room, so we don't have to disconnect everything on it, although I did drain the cooling system already. We're gonna have to drop the engine. As for back here, this piece will have to come off. This is actually the air inlet for the filter. So that goes around, and then it's got like this other big silver thing back there and everything. That kind of wraps around the intake plenum, or as Porsche calls it, the intake distributor. And so I was looking at this and how to get this out, which this is with the engine dropped, right? So the engine is lowered, and you can see we got some room up here and all that stuff. If this was an NA Porsche, then this is fine. I've taken the intake manifold out many a times with NA Porsches. So looking at this and seeing how all this stuff was, I was like, okay, let me just see what the book shows for taking this plenum out. And as it was talking, it was saying, you know, like, this is the removal and installation of the intake distributor with the engine removed. I was like, all right. Now, the other thing that made me think, like, okay, I really need to look this up, is on the NA version, the intake manifold has a flange, and it has 6 bolts that bolt down each side, right? And so I was like, okay, where are the bolts for this one? So the bolts for this one, quote unquote, are right down there. We might try to get a better shot of that with something else, but it is a coupler with worm clamps. So there is no flange. So that is literally the same thing as, you know, putting an intake on a car. It's just a rubber boot with a worm clamp on one side, a worm clamp on the other side, and that's it. So there's 3 of those, being that there's 3 couplers with 2 worm clamps on each side. I was like, okay, well, how am I going to get in there to see the orientation and make sure that everything comes out? And that's where I was like, I really need to look this up. And yeah, so I have to drop everything. I'll disconnect the power steering lines. The AC is already disconnected. I'll probably just leave it off to the side because it's not going to harm anything over there. And we're going to take off the hoses and everything like that for the cooling system, and then we'll drop this engine out with the, you know, take the axles and drive shaft off and all the other stuff with that. Yeah, and then we should have an easy access after that. Well, looking over this, it's not like the NA manual versions that I've taken out before. So it's going to take me a little bit extra time because I also don't want to break anything. This one's turbo and auto, so there's a lot more stuff. After looking it up, I found out that, you know, there's this tube here, and that was kind of what I was worried about and what I had to take out. So I was wondering how I was going to get that tube out. And I decided to look it up, and essentially when it says taking the engine out, that tube and the one that goes to the other side, because of course it is twin turbo, you unbolt a few things from the top of the engine, and then the tube and everything stay with the car, which is wonderful. I didn't know it did that. So doing that, I'm like, okay, so I'm unbolting the axles. I have this one undone. I have the under tray undone. You know, unplugging the transmission. We're gonna take the coolant lines off that go back to the engine. and then, you know, the drive shaft and other things like that. But while I was getting the stuff off the turbo, that was where I started running into, all right, how do I get some of this out? And I was kind of thinking like, well, don't tell me I have to drop the suspension knuckles and all that other stuff, which, I mean, they're just really bulky and everything, and the less I have to do, the better. Also, moving these can change the alignment, and I want to do my best to not do that. Granted, this might do a little bit, but it should bolt back. Loud noises. It should bolt back where it was, so no worries there. But yeah, the exhaust does come down with it, so just getting it freed and unbolting the axle, and then I have all this other stuff down here to make sure is undone. But yeah, so next we'll be going up and getting all that stuff out, and then we'll be dropping it hopefully, but I'm gonna go as slow as I can because I don't want to break anything. I have almost everything off, I'm pretty sure. There's, you know, a ground over here, there's a power wire under here that goes to the front, you know, all the other little things. Granted, when it comes down, you're gonna be like, what took so long? There's not, you leave everything on the engine. Yes. However, I don't want to test the tensile strength of anything on this car. So I need to make sure everything is disconnected the way that it should be. As for up here, I have, like, you know, the AC compressor was done or out. It's just hanging out here. Power steering lines are disconnected. This is for the engine harness. This is the intake that I was talking about. So this just kind of hangs out up here. And then there is one hose way back there. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it's literally as far back as you can. I have it loose. I just have to pop it off, but I can't get my hand back there. So I'm gonna start dropping the car down, and then hopefully everything is disconnected, but finding anything before we do any tensile strength testing. So we're gonna get this car on the little table that we have with some wood, and then I'm gonna start dropping the engine down. More than that. All right, where are we at? Where are we at? That's a lot of room. All right, oh, see, there's the hose that I need to take off of that thing. France? What the hell was made in France on this thing? France again? These pulleys. All right, now that we're here, right, seeing everything that I have to take out, I'm gonna show you. That's the one that we JB welded before. We're going to weld it. So I'm gonna clean up the JB weld there and, you know, put weld over it. And then as for the other stuff, so these are other lines. When we take this off, we'll see how that looks. If it's another one of these like tube that's slipped in there, we're gonna weld around those too. But that tube is connected to this, you know, cast piece, right? That cast piece goes around here, and then it's connected to this cast piece. They have these little slip joints on there which may come off. However, this cast piece holds the power steering pump, and we got to take the power steering pump out to get this piece out, because that's another hose that we have to weld. And then on the way back over here, this piece we got to take off, because these are a few of the hoses. These are 3 of them that we got to weld right by the thermostat. And then this piece is actually connected to this, all the way to this side. So there is a lot that has to come off. And in order to get these off nicely, I'm gonna take the intake manifold off so that we have easy access to it. Part of me is considering not, and just seeing if I can snake everything out this way. So we might just start taking this stuff off first, because this definitely has to come off, but we might leave the intake manifold on and just see if that stuff will come out this way. Well, change of plans. So he came by and we were talking and everything, and he did research and he talked to a couple people, and he was like, okay, pinning them seems like the better option. And I can't say that I disagree, mainly because, so I got one of the pieces off, right? So this is the one that for the power steering, little O-ring we need. But so this is what we were talking about. And essentially if I weld it, right? One thing I was worried about is this is 100,000 miles old, right? It's porous. This has whatever impurities are in there. Welding this stuff, aluminum or anything like that with a TIG welder is annoying because of how much shit is in here and it not being perfect. And then this metal and this metal are both aluminum, yes, but they're different styles. So there's chances of pinholes, which pinholes will just cause leaks or weakness or any of that other stuff. So pinning it, the term pinning it is different, but essentially what we're going to do is we're drilling a hole in there, threading it, and then putting a bolt. And that's it. And so from what I've seen on a place called Sharkworks, they actually do a lot of these turbo engines. They use red Loctite when putting the bolt in, which, yeah, if you cake it up with enough red Loctite and all that stuff, it should be fine. You shouldn't have any problems with leaks. That's what we're going to do. If you buy a kit, so if you go online and you look for these pinned lines, or even they do sell welded ones, which I'm guessing is all brand new aluminum, so you're not going to have any problem with contaminants, right? It's this piece, it's this entire piece. So from that point all the way across to the water pump and then back up to these 3 hoses. And then that piece under there. So either way, you're not going to get this out or, you know, get it in without dropping it out of the engine or out of the engine bay. So the only thing that I'm going to do for this water pump thing so that I don't have to take this whole piece off is this tube comes down to this little hole, right? There isn't anything else in here that is there. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a vacuum here while I drill, and then we're going to blow air in it to get all the shavings out that we can. And then we'll look around it and, you know, we should get everything. And for these two, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to stuff the center of the water pump full of rags, because the thermostat here, you know, you can see in there a little bit more. Yeah, you can see my finger in there. So I'm going to stuff rags in that area. And then these 2 hoses, we're just going to have the vacuum on there so that we're drawing everything. And essentially this one gets pinned right there. This one will get pinned under this bracket here, so I'm going to take that whole bracket off, but it'll get pinned under there, and then this one gets pinned here. And that pin just makes sure that it doesn't come out, because as long as these stay where they are, the adhesive stuff that they put in from factory keeps them from leaking. It's just that when there's enough pressure to pop them out, that's when problems ensue. So the pin keeps them from popping out. And then I have to get that little tube from back there out, which is actually connected to this entire piece. This here is the one that I JB welded. You can see the JB Weld here. We're still going to pin it because I don't want to trust the JB Weld forever. You know, I said I wasn't going to take this off. I have recently changed my mind while taking this apart. That brown kind of dark black stuff, whatever it is, that's like the glue, right? And so the reason why I want to take this piece off now is because as I take it, or as I was taking it apart, I actually pulled that piece out that much while getting the hose off of it, which only tells me that we weren't too far away from a catastrophic failure, because you can see where it was and how far it's moved out while I was prying everything. So that needs to, I'm going to take this whole thing off, which the big reason why I didn't want to do it is because these 3 lines here are turbo oil return lines. That's a big reason why I didn't want to mess with them. But that kind of, you know, ties my hand. We're also going to, you know, I'm going to make a list and we're going to get all new gaskets for this. And especially this hose, it was rubbing on the power steering pump. And we're just going to do this hose because we're here, so might as well. I'm going to take this off and then we're going to knurl that, and you can kind of see, where's that one? There it is. So by knurling, that's what I mean. So it has that little grip in there. So it's going to have that grip with the JB Weld. We can't knurl the inside of it, of course, but, or you know, the inside of this piece. But the outside of that will be that. I'm going to JB Weld that, and then we're still going to pin it, just like we're going to drill and pin this one. The other thing too is with some of this, how this one is looking like it's coming out. And these two up here, they don't have any kind of movement outwards. This one looks like it has a slight movement outwards. You can kind of see, I don't know if you can see too well, but you can kind of see that it's cracked. So it's separated there. So these are all things that I'm going to take into consideration. And since this is a track car, and if you haven't done track driving or any of that stuff, there comes a point where you don't really care what the expense is to not interrupt your track day. So whatever it takes to not interrupt your track day is the perfect amount, because that's why you're there. It's probably the funnest thing you can do with your clothes on, and you want to finish all of the sessions of the day. So it is just what it is. The oil lines didn't want to come off of the coolant housing, so they came off with the coolant housing. This is that one that we were talking about. So I have these fab pliers, and we're just going to kind of yank on it to get it out.
I'm not worried about it.
All right. Yeah. That didn't have long. Let me take out.
Came out pretty easy.
Yeah, there was no like crack. It started moving or anything, so that didn't have long before it flew out of the car. It depends on which model you have, GT3 or turbo, or 996, 997. They're not 100% the exact same, but it is the 6. I believe the turbo has 6 and the GT3 has 7. But the GT3, I know this one on the GT3 looks completely different than what we have here. The water pump housing, the one that I took off over here, looks almost identical on all of them. And then there's this piece that looks identical. It's just the one that goes under the intake manifold that is different for whatever reason. My only guess is probably because the intake manifold is different on the GT3 because it's not turbo. That's essentially what I'm doing for all 7 of these. I have a couple more to do. We're gonna JB Weld this thing in, and then I'm gonna drill and tap this once the JB Weld is set up, and install in reverse order. This is a lot of stuff to do for $5 worth of little bolts. But, well, I think I said it before. I don't know if I did, but if I didn't say it before, you don't need to do this unless you track one of these turbo engines. If you drive a turbo Porsche around the street, I don't care how much you floor it, you're never going to be anything close to track driving. So if you just drive on the street, don't need to do this. If you go to the track or plan on going to the track, this is something to do. As you saw, we had one that came out before and one that was on its way out after we had fixed the first one with just JB Weld and not pinning it. So the other 4 were just going to come out after that one did. And it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a lot of money for $5 worth of bolts for me to get all this taken care of, but it's never going to blow out again. It's stuck in there now, which is exactly what you want if you're going to a track day. You just want to go through the day and have fun. That's it.